My soul is shining from the light in my heart as I praise my Lord right from the start. Tears of joy overflowing from my eyes. All the pain in the past was a blessing in disguise. In the middle of the night, I will supplicate to you. As darkness fills the room, the prayers make me feel brand new. Tranquility, the break of dawn comes too soon. Belief in your mercy makes me feel I'll never lose. أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت يا رب العباد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. Thank you everyone for showing up. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Hazik Bronson, or Rashawn Bronson, which one you want to use. And I am the founder of Muslim Peer Services. Alongside my usual suspects, Sister Yusma, alaikum, and of course we got my sister Naziat, who's always here. Then my brother Gareth, who was on. I don't know what happened to him. He disappeared on me. But inshallah we'll get him back. And with us today we have two guests. We have Sister Hanandi Dole, and we have our sister Roxanne Mustafa. Alhamdulillah. Thank y'all so much for showing up. And they're going to tell us a little bit about their story today. This particular episode, we were talking about the anxiety of the helpless, meaning us being kind of helpless over here, feeling helpless. And we have that anxiety because we're frustrated because we can't do as much as we want to or would like to. So this is the main topic of today, or one of the topics of today. But I just like maybe Sister Hanandi, excuse me, to just introduce yourself a little bit, tell us what you do now, and then tell us where you're from. Give us your story, inshallah.
Thank you. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
I'm happy to be here on many different levels. I'll say that when I initially got the invitation, I said, you know what? I need to be in the audience, let alone speak on this. I was like, because I think I need a lot of help in understanding what's really happening and what's transpiring. I'll go into this. So, Hanadi Dole, I am Director of Community Partnerships at the Interfaith Center of New York. I have been working in and for the Muslim community for over about 15 years now. I create programs for religious leaders to tackle social justice issues within their community. So I have been doing this for quite some time. Happy to do it, but I'll tell you, this is harder for me to do now than post 9/11, like right after 9/11. I'll tell you, this is a little bit harder for me. And I'll go into why. After 9/11, I was fairly young, I was 16. So understanding what that was like and feeling like public enemy number one was so different. Going to Islamic school, not being in public school. I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised. My family's Palestinian. They migrated to this country. My dad, 1962. My mom came in the 70s. They met in Michigan. They got married and they moved to New York City in 1975. And they have been here ever since. My parents have been here a really, really long time. And actually, the house I'm in now is the house I've grown up in. My parents have lived here since the 80s. I don't plan on leaving. So much so that I brought my husband here and he's going to live in this house with me. And I'll say this in a way that like, and I'll tell you the difference of how I felt. I was just recently in Jordan for 2 months and I just got back. And growing up here as Palestinian, from the moment you can understand and comprehend, Palestine is in your mind. You understand that we are Palestinian and that our home, our true home, is Palestine, and that we're here. It could be forever. Allah knows, right? But like in essence, we're gonna go back one day. Meaning, we'll all be able to go home freely without being terrorized, without being dehumanized, without being made to defend why we're coming home. Um, and I saw a difference. Like this is something ever since I was a little kid, Palestine, 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 in public school, private school, wherever I was, college. My master's thesis was on the interplay between religion and history and Palestinian-Israeli relations, to the point where I dedicated my studies to Palestine. That's how strong it is in our blood. When I was in Jordan, and October 7th happened while I was there. I was there during this time. Yes, the people were vigilant. They were standing, protesting, and doing. But this one question I kept getting was, wow, you're so tied to Palestine and you're in America. And I'm like, I grew up only knowing Palestine. That's it. It's something, I think it's a cultural thing, right? I just think it's something very cultural for us as Palestinians, that we understand that we are displaced, that we are, among high number of refugees around the world. And subhanAllah, I think wherever we are very successful, alhamdulillah, in many countries, and America being one of them. It's been really, really hard for me. Hard for me mentally, hard for me physically, where I'm having a hard time at work. And my job is, I work with underrepresented, underserved communities all across New York City. And Muslims being, of course, a big majority of that, but just like Palestine is such a hot topic that people either really want to jump all in or they don't want to touch it at all. And I'm having a hard time because it's like, why do we have to constantly humanize our oppressor? Why do we have to humanize what is happening to our, who is doing what to our people? And it's like, as Arabs, we're Semites, and this term gets thrown out that we're anti-Semitic, that we're this, that we're that. Like, the reality is we're not against Jews. This is not a religious thing. We're not against Jews. We're against Zionism. And there's a big, big, big difference between the two. And it's just trying to and when I say we, I mean we, those that are fighting against occupation, oppression, apartheid, genocide. These are things that we as a people, let alone as Palestinians, put that on the side, cannot sit by on the sidelines and watch this horror happen. And I'm happy to be a part of this conversation, because inshallah, like, I want to walk away knowing what else I can better do for myself before I can help others, and just understanding mentally that this is a tough space. And I've seen so many things online, like, check in on your Palestinian friends. Like, this is difficult. It's, unfortunately, I've, like, even at one point, like, I've taken a break from social media because I felt like every time I opened it up, I just saw horror and atrocities. And it was like, Ya Allah, how much can... And here I'm alhamdulillah safe in my house in Brooklyn, right? Like, I have a bed, I have food, I have clothes, and my biggest worry is, what am I going to eat, right? Like, I hate to say that, but like, the reality is like, what am I really going through in comparison to what they are, right? Like, how I hope that, like, there is I don't even know what a solution could be, right? Like, it's besides putting our faith in Allah and understanding that Allah is the best of all planners. We can say that we have a plan, but Allah has a better plan for all of us. And I hope that there is a light at the end of the tunnel for this, what is happening in Gaza. And I think I'll share this with you. I had posted some, and you know how, like, Facebook brings up your memories, like from 10, 7, 10, whatever years ago. I've been on Facebook way too long, so I'm dating myself. I had a post come up from 12 years ago, 2 days ago. and it said, "Long live Palestine." And, fighting against the occupation. It blows my mind that here I am, how many years later, I reshared it. I was like, this is something I posted 12 years ago and it still stands true today. Right? Like, I hope that like in a month that memory, some another memory like that comes up and I'm like, alhamdulillah, we're free and then we can move on, Like I know I'm living in a dream world, but like I hate that a post from 12 years ago still reigns true today about Palestine. Um, I think I'll stop there. I think that was quite a bit for me, but thank you. Just like looking on and
You
right.
can go, sis. If that's what you feel, go for it. But
I mean,
it's something that we need to hear, because some of us, you know, who've either never left the United States, or like you said, you from Brooklyn, I'm from Brooklyn, I'm from Coney Island, which not quite Brooklyn, right? Coney Island is its own little planet. So, so but it's still considered Brooklyn in a way.
yeah.
And I know my brother Gareth, he's from Brooklyn, and the sisters are from wherever they're from, and my wife is from Brooklyn. So it's a different attitude, a different way that we move. So it's hard to, understand, like when you talk about occupation and stuff, when people talk about that stuff, we don't really get it, but the sisters and the brothers that we've heard from in the past 2 episodes that we did, have kind of narrowed it down for us, but we've never had someone like yourself, like you said, who was raised there, but has that blood connection. How does that make you feel as a person? And how is it, in a family who has those not only strong ties, but like you said, Palestine runs through your blood.
Yeah.
And it's like, the way that you live, and that's what you think about. And that's what we really want to hear, and, you explained it to us, alhamdulillah.
Uh, I want to share something really quickly that happened to me a couple of days ago, last week. Um, like I said, I work in faith-based work, like all faith traditions. So Gareth has an idea of what I do. And the other day I was leaving work and I ran into a father, Christian father, right? And he's someone I've worked with many, many years. And he's subhanAllah, I was looking at him, he looked so much older, you know what I mean? I was like, Ya Allah, like he's getting old, And I'm in pretty okay spirits, for relative of what's happening in the world. And I said, hi father, how are you doing? And he's like, how are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know how I'm doing. I'm not okay, right? And he grabbed me and he's like, I want you to know that I'm doing my best to make sure that I'm educating people around me about what's happening in Palestine, right? And he said something, and he said that it's hard, right? Because he was trying to like create a vigil at his cathedral for what's happening, and he was getting a lot of pushback, right? Very transparent. He was like, I'm getting a lot of pushback. And I looked at him, I was like, the world is a sad place right now. And he looked at me, I don't know what it was, and he's like, the support that he offered me in that moment, I tell you, I broke down and I cried. I don't know where it came from. Like repressing the feelings of seeing what we see online, hearing the stories. We all know people that are there. We all know somebody who has some sort of link in Gaza. Forget about Palestine in general, but in Gaza, right? Like you have a link there. And when he said that to me, I don't know, it was like the dam broke loose and I was bawling in the middle of the street. And older gentleman grabbed me and was like, go with heart and know that God will always be with you and with those that are oppressed. I didn't know what to say, right? Like this was someone who, like, I felt like in that moment, Allah sent him to me in that moment to help me sort of navigate what I was dealing with internally and what I'm dealing with work, what I'm dealing with in the world, just in that moment to just tell me that even the littlest things I do is a step in the right direction. Right? And I want people to understand that because I think at the end of the day, we're all like, man, what can one person really do for what's happening in Palestine? What can we, and around the world, it's not just Palestine. What's happening in Congo? What's happening in Sudan? Like these are things that are very, very important that should be front and center. And I just want you to know that like everyone should use their voice to the best of their capacity, whether that's posting something online, whether that's having a conversation with one person, right? Not putting yourself in harm's way, obviously, right? But just knowing how to have certain conversations and educating yourself about what's really happening, and just knowing that taking those steps is like you're going in the right directions. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but I promise you it's always in the right way. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, sis. Now, next special guest, we have our sister Roxanne Mustafa. Same thing, sis. We'd like you to come on, just give us a little bit of knowledge about yourself, what you do, and then also, expound on your experience.
Well, I went back an awful lot. I was born and raised here, like Hanadi. My family were a family of immigrants and refugees. I think that my parents, I don't know if you relate, Hanadi, but I don't think we understood the word refugee when we came here to this country. It's always almost like a lot of things that I have the language for a lot of things because we couldn't talk about things when we were growing up in the 70s and the 80s. I was a little girl. I was born in the 70s. And when I came to sort of understand my place in Brooklyn as a young girl, there were a lot of things that just didn't make sense. But Rashawn, my family longed for the connectedness that we were missing. So they sent me with my older brother to Palestine twice. And then I went again as a young woman. And then I recently went back 20 years later last year. So I got to see this timeline through the perspective and the lens of an American. So my story is I was born and raised in Brooklyn, like Hanadi. I actually started kindergarten. I love telling this story because I seem and look so Americanized. I actually didn't speak English until I started kindergarten because my family were such new immigrants. My mother especially was married at a very young age. And, we were growing up in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. And I remember her sending me if you ask anyone in my family, I have the worst memory, but I remember walking into my kindergarten class and not knowing how to speak the language. And those were some of the first feelings of like otherness or something's different or something like I can't reconcile who I am with this construct called America. That was the very first time. My mom loves to tell the story how quickly I learned English. And I was a blabbermouth and I was always inquisitive, that we had a Jewish doctor on Smith Street. And she would go to him and say, in her broken English, my daughter, she talks too much, questions. I can't, and she always reminds me that the Jewish doctor, it's a lovely Jewish doctor. He always said to her, you have a very inquisitive, very verbal daughter, and you need to encourage this. That, I think, stayed with me most of my life, always asking questions. Things just never felt right. And anyone who knows me knows that I always went into every space trying to figure out how to reconcile who I am. And as a Palestinian, as a woman, as a Muslim, my family started to identify with Islam. A lot of the refugees in the 60s and the 70s, Palestinians, we didn't have our identity as Palestinian. So when we were expelled, we identified with our religion. Nationalism didn't exist. That's why the Ottoman Empire, Palestine was an autonomous state. And I think a lot about how my father talks about, my father's a huge World War I and World War II buff, and he talks about the European nationalism. We didn't have that in the Middle East. Gamal Abdel Nasser was the first one who started to talk about this in a European construct, but within the Middle East. But Palestine was always, in my family history, just this pluralistic, open society. So, as my family became more religious, we were trying to claim our identity in the 70s and the 80s, figuring out who we were in this country called America. Long story short, I remember being the kind of child growing up in Brooklyn that wanted to do well in school. Looking back, I was trying to fit in within the construct of our Western colonialist education system. So I tried to blend in. I had a lot of white and Jewish friends in school, in the classrooms, in the honors classes. And I was always trying to fit in and figure it out. By the time I got to college, I started to really lean into who I was and kind of find my identity. My family was sort of trying to always remind me what my roots were. And I was rejecting it for a long time because I wanted to fit into this idea of whiteness in America. And that's an important part of my story, because that journey, that Western construct trying to impose its definitions on my Eastern values, on my Arab and Muslim values, was always in conflict. In college, I was starting to become a little bit more intellectual about it. I studied political science and I studied musicology, and I minored in religion. And that's when my family became even more Muslim. Like, Islam was now like a part of our identity in the household. So I was learning about Islam in my family's home, and then learning about it in an academic way. Understanding my Palestinian identity in my family's roots, going to college and understanding how we were talking about it as a political construct. And I think in college is when I realized that my identity has been politicized since the day I was born, just like many of us Palestinians were, whether we wanted it or not. Just the fact that when we say proudly that we are Palestinian, and I would often say to people, I'm Palestinian American, and I think it's the same with Islam too. When you say you're a Muslim, our identity here is politicized. It's immediately in opposition with something else. And I started to learn the language, and I focused on these studies in college. I always joke, I joke with my husband, like I studied politics and I was studying law because I wanted to be a lawyer. But then I had a focus on Near Eastern studies. I focused on music, which in America, musicology is the study of Western civilization through music. So it's basically the study of Western civilization. But then I had a minor in Near Eastern musical studies. So I was learning about how our half tones and quarter tones and how our beats and our depths and the roots of these things. So it was like, I was always in these like two worlds, always, as an American. So kind of fast forward to my adult being, my sort of like when I really started to come to my own, I started to feel more comfortable in my own skin, but it was through the lens and the identity of the Black liberation movement. And again, it was still like a challenge for me to be able to kind of identify with Palestinian liberation. It was either Yasser Arafat, a terrorist, or not. Don't say anything or you're a terrorist. And this is even before 9/11, like you were saying, Hennady. So the language was so, it was a square peg in a round hole. I had to fit into these constructs. And thank goodness for Brother Malcolm X. What was so important about Brother Malcolm is how, as a Muslim, he was able to speak the Western language through our values as Eastern people, through the lens of Islam, through the lens of liberation. And I remember that speech that he gave about Palestine. And I remember when that biography came out, and I was like, Spike Lee's, I was just all in. I was all in. I started studying about Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King as a radical, not the sort of whitewashed version that we have in school. And then I started to understand Yasser Arafat and his communion with Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, other liberators. And I really started to understand that the liberation of Palestinian people as part of a colonialist construct was tied in America to the liberation of Black people. I really still believe that. And, Black Lives Matter was an important part for me in my life. But I would swing back and forth between talking about Palestinian issues and then talking about Black liberation and systemic racism here in this country, because I still believe the topic of this is the psychology of the occupation, but it's really this occupation is the method of colonialism for Palestine right now. It's just the vehicle of the colonialist conquest, because the definition of colonialism is to eventually subjugate and uproot an indigenous population by an exterior or external population. And the occupation, I think when we say occupation, it's short for military occupation. And I think that that's a pejorative. I think that's a misnomer. There's nothing about this that's military. There's nothing about this that's temporary. There's nothing about the occupation of Palestine that's temporary. We all are seeing the genocide that began in pre-1948, actualized in the Nakba, continuously being followed through to today. So military occupation is a temporary state, and that's not what's happening. As we see Israel plant its flags in northern Gaza. So when I think about like the psychology of the occupation, I think about the psychology of colonized people. And when my story, Rashawn and everyone here, is really like this constant unlearning and shedding of the two skins and the two realities that I occupy. I'm an American who fights for social justice through the lens of our laws. I fight and I talk about international laws, yet my people, it does not apply. It does not apply. For the Palestinian people, laws and sense of human, like just morality and human decency, it does not apply. When someone is stepping on your neck, as we saw with George Floyd, and remember all of those posters about how similar the methods of our police, specifically the murder of George Floyd, was with the Israeli occupation, the psychology of that triggered me so much. Michael Brown being shot in Ferguson because he looked threatening to a cop that was standing 50 yards away. His body was politicized. That is every day for Palestinians in the West Bank. It is, and the situation in Gaza is, it's like a little bit more nefarious because the military doesn't occupy, but it chokes it from the outside. So these poor children who have been suffering so much, who over 5,000 of them are now martyred and in heaven, Allah yarhamhum, they felt it from the day they were born. They felt that like choking. And I think there's a psychology in Gaza of the occupation. I think there's a psychology in the West Bank that we have to unpack. But for me, and I wonder if Hanadi feels the same, there's a psychology for us as like American Palestinians. It's like beyond survivor's guilt. It's beyond gaslighting. It's like we have the language of the West, yet we're seeing it being used against our people. It does not apply. And that is something that makes me very emotional because I don't think I need to tell you why it makes me emotional. I think it's obvious. And I think what we're seeing now is something that's really, really hard to unpack. And it's especially hard to unpack on this American soil right now that we occupy as just, these beings, while we're seeing the way the soil over there is being turned against the humans that live there. It's really just a crazy time for all of us. One thing I'll say just to close this is I have so many wonderful, wonderful friends, and a lot of them occupy. I'm not going to use that word. A lot of them are Jewish friends who move in social spaces, and so many of them reached out to me and said to me, "How are you? I am so sorry." And one of my wonderful neighbors said to me, she came to the rally here on Staten Island, and she looked at me and she said, "I feel so complicit." And I said to her, "Why?" She said, "Because I'm Jewish and that's in my name." And I said to her, we are all complicit. All of us. We are allowing this genocide to happen. And I said, don't ever let anybody use your religion as the cause of this. This is very easily and very clearly a power struggle. And we are the orphans of the world right now. And I will not frame this as a Jewish and Muslim conflict. I don't think any good God-fearing Muslim will ever do that, because we have nothing but kinship and symmetry. Just like you said, Hanedi, they're Semitic people, they're our cousins. We have nothing but affection and affiliation for our Jewish brethren. We accepted them when the European world didn't. We saw them as belonging to the land. But what was hard is we all seem to, in the Western world, think that occupation was an alternative to immigration. And we somehow still do. Like, we just want to walk in this construct of a colonial conquest. And I think a lot of us here want to reject that very emphatically and say, Palestinians exist. We existed on this land. We love this land, just like any other people love their land. We had a way of life. We were here. Our culture was here. Our culture was one of acceptance and pluralism. And we all desire that back when we say free Palestine. It's in our hearts and it's in our minds. It's in our land. It's in our soil. It's in our children. It's in our forefathers, our ancestors. And I think we all, like, that's the longing, I think, in the psychology of this. There's just such a heart-wrenching heartbreak for all occupied people everywhere, but especially for Palestinians, because somehow we get caught in the politics of the West and then we lose sight of the fact of what's really going on.
One of the things you said that reminded me, you said the psychology of the people who were there is also as well as the people who are here. And I was watching, well, a few things. There's a documentary that I think is very helpful, especially to show our Jewish friends. It would be The 5 Broken Cameras, I believe it's called. And I think that's it's a very good documentary for those who are non-Muslims as well as Muslims as well, to see what's going on in Palestine. And this was years, way before, this particular conflict started, right? Or supposed to what they say when it started. But I wanted to talk about what this Jewish lady who was actually, she would go back and forth from Palestine, and she had friends in Gaza as well as in the West Bank, and she lived near the border. And she explained that there's no way, like when you talked about when you were saying, like Sister Anati was like, I don't know, what the solution is, right? But we know it's not what's happening. Even if these people are saying that they have issues with a particular group of people, it's kind of strange to me that you would have this level of surveillance, like this young lady was explaining, that they have cameras pointing inside of people's homes all through the streets in the West Bank and in Palestine. They have automated weapons trained to do with facial recognition to shoot at those who they deem to be terrorists or whoever. They've locked up over 200 children. I'm sure it's more than that, but this is what they'll tell you. Countless men and women who have disappeared without trial, without, representation, without things that happen. We know about all these atrocities that take place, and then you tell me you can't, with all this surveillance and technology, you have drones flying overhead whatever it is, all day, every day, and you can't pinpoint a particular people. You have to bomb everyone. Something is very wrong with that situation.
Well, we all know what's really happening, though.
I
think we all know that this is a smokescreen effect, and the cyclical bombing of Gaza over and over and over again. It is the quintessential recipe of genocide. Yes. It is to constantly disfranchise, disconnect, dislocate the people from the land. Mm-hmm. And it upsets me, because part of the psychology of this is the sort of terror or the psychological warfare that's happening on the Palestinians, mostly the Palestinians that are there, but also the ones that are abroad like us, to make us feel like we can never go back to our home. Mm-hmm. Yet somehow we hold on, because I think what's remarkable about the Palestinian people, and I am biased, is our faith in the hereafter. We understand that everything that happens is God's will, and in the Let Jordan take them. Let this country take them. Let this country take just where are the Arabs? Let them go. This is a form of psychological warfare. They want us to leave. And yet people can't leave. And the Westerners, the American people can't understand, like, why don't they just go to Egypt? We know if we leave, and the Gazan people are so strong and so savvy. They know if they leave, they will never be allowed to return. They know it. It doesn't need a psychological name. It doesn't need a, sorry. Okay. It doesn't need any kind of like intellectualization for the Gazan people. We all know it and we feel it. But meanwhile, the West has to deconstruct it and break it down. Why can't Egypt accept them? Why can't Jordan come and safeguard the, let them continue to demystify this. But we already understand the playbook. And we know also what the terror campaign is. And we're so sensitive to it, like a child that has anxiety. We're sensitive to it. Our radars go off. So we know. So the psychology of this genocide is something that really needs to be unpacked by the West, because we are like their example right now in real life, on social media, in real time. And if we don't learn from this, then the Jewish plea of never again will never really, really be fulfilled, because right now it's just horrifying what's happening.
This is the truth. And I was going to speak about the psychology of the people who are there and why things happen. We understand, we always say in the hood, pressure bust pipes, right? It's understandable what happened when these people always, the first thing they do, well, you have to, condemn what happened on October 7th. And we always talk about what happened before, way before October 7th. The October 7th that happened for 70 something years. We have to understand, like, we want to bring it to this country where you brought the Black liberation struggle. How some of us in this country, we revere people like Frederick Douglass, right? And not only Frederick Douglass, but Nat Turner, especially among youth and Black folks. We always talk about Nat Turner and the slave revolts. Like, this was something that was powerful and people always talk about it. But we have to mention what happened during those slave revolts. Babies got killed, beheaded, people got beheaded, slave masters got tortured, women got killed, all these different things. But then we look back on it, what they don't mention is Nat Turner was a slave. Here's the problem. This man was brilliant, but some of them say that he memorized the whole Bible by heart. The dude used to have all of these different, and he would, say he was well read and highly intelligent. And the frustration comes in because he was under occupation. He was a slave. Now understand what happens when you beat down a people to a point where they have nothing to live for. They don't even think about having a future. What is my future when I know for a fact that my baby is going to be a slave? And that baby's baby will most likely be a slave. There's no outlook for me. I can't own anything. I can't be anybody. They would cut my tongue out if they caught me reading a book. This is the type of stuff that you talk about. So when we see these so-called atrocities happen, there's a different way to look at it. You could say, okay, it's horrible that these people die. Anyone dying is horrible. Getting murdered is horrible. Nobody's saying anything different. But what I won't tolerate is forgetting what happened before that caused that in the first place. You created these people. Not only did you create them, you funded them. You know what I mean? The leader of you people decided, I'm going to deliver a suitcase full of money to your leaders. You can't be serious and talk about, I'm trying to stop these particular people when you're the one who created these people. It's almost like the American government saying like, yo, we hate ISIS. Really? MashaAllah. You hate them. You created these people. You funded these people.
That's a whole nother Wellness Wednesdays on that.
That's a whole nother thing.
I was gonna say this is
but this is the psychology of the oppressed people. This is why they start to revolt and become something other than what it may have started. It might have been a political movement at first. We want to be for our people. then it turns into something else, because what else do we have? There's no way you're going to tell me. There's no way for a person like me to understand. We try to deal with our Jewish brothers and sisters the way, in humanity. We deal with our Christian brothers and sisters in humanity. And we always nice to them. We care about them, because you can't try to guide the people that you don't care about. This is a fact, right? So in that regard, it's like, okay, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to tell our people to just lay down and take it until all of you are wiped out, until we starve your children out, until we do all of these things? And then the psychology of the people there is what? It's desperation time. It's desperation time. It's go time. And like I always, mentioned back when we talked about these other things, we say we see what happens here when people are desperate. And we have all of the outlets. Yeah. But we see what happened. We talking about black folks in the 70s, 60s, 80s, 90s. We seen what it was. And we see what it is now. People are fighting for rights when we had more rights than we had back then. We have way more rights than the Palestinians. And people are still dying for the cause. So imagine, I'm not, I would never sit back and talk about what these people did on October 7th. Never. And say that these people, condemn these people for what? I'm not condemning anyone, right? Unless you first condemn all of the stuff that happened before. And then we could talk about condemning what came after. Then I'll be with you. I'll be with you like, yeah, that was crazy. I condemn those acts of killing. If there were babies that died, if there were, women and children that died, then absolutely, I condemn all of those. But let's start the conversation from where it started. We can't start from the middle. You know what I mean? That's not even the middle. We can't start from almost the end and then say like, oh, okay, well, we have an issue with those people.
You either judge everyone or no one. You either give everyone or no one a pass.
And for me, that's why I said I have this issue of the psychology here. This is my anxiety issues. When I see our politicians, when I say our, I mean the people who voted for these clowns. Our politicians stand up in the government and say, kill them all.
Yeah.
These are people that we voted into office. When the lady asked, well, how many people have to die before you? The lady stood up and said, kill them all until they finish every last one of them. And then we have the other side, it doesn't matter. And for those, and I'm sorry, for those who believe that Democrats are different from Republicans, I feel sorry for you. When we have to do our history and understand that the Dixiecrats was lynching black folks in this country. They were no different from the Republicans. They'll sit back and send drones to go kill your babies, put up a fake argument on TV, and then go eat lunch with each other. Correct?
The same people who co-signed bombing and airdropping bombs on Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, is the same government that co-signs these drone strikes all across the world and these airstrikes all across the world. It's the same government. The same government that co-signed the atrocities of these black towns that were affluent and had affluent people, and these towns were razed to the ground. The same government that co-signed that is the same government that gives Israel billions of dollars annually to do what they do. So
Yes,
it's the same puppet master. So
Yes,
it's not off kilter.
No.
It's the same thing.
I think what gives me anxiety through all of this is having to justify Palestinian resistance when during the Holocaust, Jews that created resistance were revered for the same thing that was happening. And I have met dozens and dozens of descendants of Holocaust survivors, and they've all just saying not in our name right now, correct? And it's having this conversation of, why was it okay for Ukrainians to create Molotov cocktails and throw them at Russians, and that was okay? And people here were up in arms waving the Ukrainian flag because they didn't want Russia to take over Ukraine, right? Now, and this country's funding money over there. Now that Palestinians, and this made me laugh. If you saw, I was laughing. when you mentioned how people are opposing the resistance when the resistance was put in place by who? Please go read up on history of Hamas. That's it. I won't say any more. If you don't know, go read upon the history of Hamas and find out who put Hamas where and why they're there. That's the first point I say to anyone who wants to talk to me about this. Understand the history of Hamas before you come and talk about resistance, this, that. No, understand. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot of history in Palestine. Any Palestinian will come back and tell you about 1917, the Balfour Declaration. All of us know this date like it's our birthday. Why? Because it was a very important time for all of us as Palestinians. The biggest thing that gives me anxiety now about what's happening in Palestine is I can't believe I'm witnessing the second Nakba, the catastrophe. Another catastrophe where Palestinians are being displaced yet again in droves, in millions, not thousands. We're dying in thousands, but we're being displaced by the millions. And it's like, oh my God, I thought in my lifetime I'd possibly see a free Palestine, but instead I'm seeing the opposite, right? Like I'm seeing, and for people that like are pro-Israeli and, only want to condemn Hamas, have y'all seen what IDF soldiers are posting on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook? Where's the humanity? That's my question is, where's the humanity? The pictures that they posted of the Palestinian men hostages that are naked on the floor with or the Israelis, the IDF soldiers that are on the beaches of Gaza saying we're taking what's supposed to be ours. When in the same reel you see Palestinian children with their heads cut off, like why do we have to post those dying children for people to see? Oh shit! Excuse me, that there's something going on, that there's something wrong happening. Why?
If social media existed in 1939, the Nazis would be doing the same exact thing.
100.
If the Nazis had TikTok, it would just be in black and white.
It was in a primitive form back then.
Exactly.
And it's evolved. And you're so right, Hannadi. It's like this must be what our forefathers felt like during the Nakba. And even more sinister, this must be what the Jews felt like when they were being shepherded to carts and cars. I can't even say it. Why are we allowing this to continue? Why the double standard on brown skin? And let's be clear. I think this is a space where we can all understand what I'm about to say. When someone tells you to condemn Hamas, this whole thing that we've been seeing on the media, they're asking you to pick an allegiance. They're asking you to do the Pledge of Allegiance in front of them. They're asking you to co-sign the tax dollars that we already pay and the tax dollars that the British and the European pay to kill our people. They're asking you to claim your proximity to their agenda to finish the job. That's what it really is. How could you even ask one human being to another, do you condemn innocent people getting killed? And how in the same breath do you not understand that this is a resistance group? What do you think they're resisting? But the construct then becomes, oh, they hate us. They want to kill us. And no, the propaganda campaign in its primitive form, to Gareth, brother, what you were just saying, this is it in its primitive form. This is like the same propaganda playbook of the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. Oh, they want to kill us. They want to kill us. They want to wipe us out. There's no evidence of this. They take our phrase from the river to the sea to now extend it to be, oh, it means genocide.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hamas said it in its charter. No, Likud has it in its charter. The Likud party has it in its charter to annihilate us. The people that you referenced, Roshan, like all of those people came right out and told you what they're planning to do. Yet we're still trying, we're still trying to reconcile how to live with all of our neighbors, all of them. We still call them guests. We still call them cousins because our religion and our values do not let us demean, but our religion and our values will always allow us to, I say a lot of times to people because they just don't understand. And it's literally just like this. Look at this, Hannity, we were talking about like what a beautiful life we have here in America, right? I have a beautiful home, alhamdulillah, on Staten Island. My boys are healthy. My husband is a wonderful partner. My family is healthy. We go to work. We pay our taxes. We vote. We fight for equality. We move in social justice. We do charity. Our charity during Ramadan goes to American charities. We help our brothers or sisters. So do our Jewish neighbors. We have a wonderful life here in America. And I say to people, imagine someone came and said to you today, because I'm not talking about when we were the first settler colonialist state, and we won't get into that history right now. But today, with the colonization has already happened. The indigenous population is almost extinct, and that is on our hands. Now, 300 years later, so imagine someone came to your door and said, Roxanne, you and your family, get out of Staten Island. This house, it's mine now. You would never relinquish it willingly. Never. And then someone said to you, you actually are not a Staten Islander. You are actually not a New Yorker. We were here first 4,000 years ago. And no one would ever accept that logic in today's laws. That's why we say justice for Palestine. It is not legal. So when someone says to you, do you condemn Hamas? They're asking you to be complicit in this twisted logic and want to know whether or not you will fight for justice for the same laws that you purport to support to Palestinian and brown-skinned people. And that's what upsets me so much, that someone would degrade my own sense of right and wrong and humanity and ask me to condemn Hamas. I always say, do you condemn the occupation? Yeah. Do you? No, you test your humanity first to me. Palestine is a litmus test for you. Hamas is not a litmus test for me. Hamas is a militant group in a small population people keep saying it, an open air prison. We got to stop calling that. It's a concentration camp. It's a reservation. It's a reservation. The reservation of the indigenous people that we imposed on the Native Americans, because eventually we want to get rid of them. We want to pretend that they didn't exist. Do you condemn that? I put the test on their humanity, not ours. Do not ask a targeted, victimized, colonized people to justify their existence to you and your privilege. And I during Black Lives Matter, I would run around the city in all sorts of protests and all sorts of talks talking about this for our Black population and our Black movement here, our Black Americans, standing alongside of them, and watch them say the same things. Like, listen to us. Listen to what we're telling you. Listen to Black women. They're the litmus test for America. They're telling you what they're going through. Listen to them when they speak. Today, internationally, I say, listen to us privileged Palestinians that can see the world through both of the lenses. Listen to Noor Arakat. Listen to the human rights attorney that fights for the laws. Listen to the head of Amnesty International. See what they say. Stop listening to the old white men who are running the charade. Yeah. And then you will find the truth. And it's always the old white men and their complicit proxies that are running around asking, do you condemn Hamas? I will not operate in that construct.
I hear that 100%. I feel you. I want to give our sisters Yusma and Naziat time to speak. I know I saw that face, Yusma, like, what can you say after that, right? But I'll ask, okay, let's see. So we'll let Sister Naziat, if you want to say something or not, it's up to you. I'm just saying, because I would like to get a perspective of someone who is not Palestinian, who is not, whatever, but your worldview as well.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Alaikum salam.
After that, I agree. There's really nothing much you can say, because there's just so much. There are so many things here at play. But I do want to just, kind of talk a little bit about, psychology of, the psychological consequences of occupation. And, I'm Bengali. On some levels, I actually come from a country where there was genocide, the Bangladeshi Liberation War of 1971. So I I grew up in America. My family is not, my family immigrated from Bangladesh in the 90s. Growing up, I would hear a lot about, the atrocities and how everyone was just under this, they were second class citizens, being Bengali. So I can somewhat relate to the Palestinian struggle, and even till this day, Bangladesh supports Palestine, the liberation movement, to the 100%. We were able to get our freedom. We were able to become a country, but this, I feel like it's not to compare or anything, but our struggle is the Palestinian. Our liberation movement is equivalent to the Palestinian liberation. So I connect with that a lot. I also want to touch a little bit upon the psychology of the genocide and the psychological consequences. If you want to learn more about the psychological consequences of the genocide, Dr. Salma Jawahar, she's a Palestinian psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and writer. She's actually the chair of the mental health unit at the Palestinian Ministry of Health. She's written columns and articles about psychological consequences. And she wrote an article last month, right after October 7th, where she talked about how the American Psychiatric Association issued a statement condemning Hamas's attack, right? But didn't address the 75-year occupation of Palestine by Israelis. So it's just baffling how this huge institution, this large institution, can be so one-sided when it comes to mental health, when it comes to psychology, when it comes to psychiatry. They cast a blind eye to the besieged population in Gaza, half of whom are children. They make no mention of the horrific bombardment, right, of Gaza. It's just appalling. And another thing that I want to share is that the Western concept of psychology, the Western diagnoses, the psychological concepts, they're all Westernized. They don't apply to Palestinians. They don't apply to Gaza because Palestinians are constantly living through the trauma. There's no, like I mentioned before, there's no post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a constant, it's constantly going through stress every day. And when the body goes through stress, and it produces a hormone called cortisol. So when the cortisol keeps getting produced, for a very long time, the body doesn't understand safety. The body doesn't understand what it means to be safe. Safety, it becomes a foreign concept, right? And also, producing the stress hormones, constantly being on the fight or flight response, right, puts people at a higher risk of anxiety, depression, diabetes, cholesterol, heart problems, all of this that we're seeing today. So, it's just baffling how, even the West, when it comes to psychology, doesn't want to acknowledge this occupation, doesn't want to acknowledge the psychological consequences of genocide.
100%. You're 100% correct there. Because, if you start to humanize people, then that's a problem for the most. We've always had labels put on us, just like they have on the Palestinians. Animals, they're less than human. We actually got it written into law for us. What were we, Gareth? Three-fourths of a human being in the Constitution or something like this?
3/5 of a man.
3/5, right. Even less than cattle.
Which still hasn't been amended, by the way.
Yeah, of course not.
It's been pseudo-amended via, wink, wink, the 13th Amendment, which gave rise to the prison industrial complex,
right?
In which
Absolutely.
Inmates are slaves by default, by definition.
All right, Sister Yusma, let me hear your perspective on this real quick.
We're all preaching to the choir here. We all, we're talking, of course, we're all going to be like, okay, this is, we're in agreement. The topic is specifically psychology. I believe Sister Roxanne mentioned, social media, and Brother Gareth mentioned that too. Social media has been around, for a couple centuries. We've seen the colonizers take selfies with their scalped indigenous victims, with the victims of lynchings. Those are really selfies from the past. So they've been around for a couple of centuries as evidence, and a lot of times they're smiling, they're laughing in those pictures. And this is all, again, in the spirit of I guess, it's not even a holiday tomorrow, whatever the day is tomorrow, that we've dubbed a certain day, or that the ruling party has dubbed a certain day. When we look at colonization, occupation, that and the word playbook was mentioned. That playbook has been around for centuries. The idea of creating this fear that there is a certain population that is getting out of hand, or they are occupying a certain land. And I use that word occupying because that has been the word that has been used for centuries as well. And the slow replacement of that population. Whether it's taking away children and putting them in different areas, separating them from their families, whether it's replacing the partners of women to mass procreate with them, because unfortunately that is, again, something that has been there for centuries. We see that happening in current day as well. We see that with the Uyghurs in China. Muslim women's partners are being replaced by non-Muslim men so that they are forced to procreate with them and lay with them. We have seen replacement with the Aboriginal population in Australia as well. Mass incarceration. We've seen the incarcerated brought from other islands into Australia, to specifically white former incarcerated brought into Australia. And again, we've seen this everywhere. So this, when I've taught this to my students, and this is in a public system, this was in the CUNY system, this is part of what I showed them, is that none of this is new. This is ongoing. This is something that has been there for centuries, not decades. This has been there for centuries. And this has been oft repeated, because this is, again, the European playbook of colonization, of genocide, of replacement, because that's the goal, right? Is that you're trying to replace one population with another. That's what that is. Mass genocide. You're wiping out a population in order to then replace that population, whether it's on land, whether it's genetically, whether it's socially, culturally. And there's, as Sister Roxanne mentioned, yes, there is also, and Sister Hanadi mentioned this too, there's a military aspect to it, but you cannot break down a population without the behavioral and the psychological aspect to go with it. You don't break them down into those little pieces without showing, the bare bones, that trying to convince them. And again, as has been done with indigenous populations, as was done during the slave trade, to basically show that you are less than human. And so that trauma, and trauma is a very minimal word for that. Because trauma implies that it's just psychological, whereas these ideas that are implanted are also very genetic. We've seen that through research, that this carries on through multiple generations. And so this idea of this replacement of a population socially, culturally, the replacing the language, behaviorally, the identity, replacing all of it has been carried down. So this is, and when people talk about this and ask about this, again, we mentioned the double standard. We're all preaching to the choir. There's a double standard everywhere. My husband is Ukrainian, and we've talked about the Ukrainian war, and in addition to that, he's learned, he's seen little by little, yes, there is a double standard. There's a double standard. There is, of course, going to be a preference for the European person they're fighting for their rights, and they're fighting for their land, and it's okay for their children to throw rocks at tanks, but it's not okay for our children to throw rocks at tanks. That we're looking at a quote hostage negotiation. You're negotiating for children and women that are in prisons, that have been in prisons for nothing. The children and women in prisons, and I don't think people quite understand that this has been going on again for a very long time. Women and children in prisons, and that they've been there, that they've arrested children as young as 10, 11, 12 years old, and that they've been in jail until they're 15, 16, 17, quote, going on trial. I mean, these are things that I don't think really settle into people's minds. They hear hostage exchange, but don't hear the rest of exactly what's happening there. So, just to, again, in the spirit of everything that's going on with tomorrow and with everything coming up, we also remind everyone that, and that's why I believe the indigenous population, Native Americans here also connect with that so much, is because this has been an ongoing struggle for centuries. And this has been repeated over and over. It's, as others mentioned, it's cyclical. Everything comes back around. And, we know that they learn from each other, that one playbook just advances another playbook. And so this has been continuing. And, again, that's how I've taught my students this in the past, is that this is not new. This is not just coming up. This is not, you're not just seeing this in the news and social media or whatever. This has just been kept from you. And now you have the resources to understand this, to go out on your own also and understand this. So, hopefully we can pass this on as well. And I hope I'm seeing a little bit more younger people kind of getting involved in this, and I didn't see that before at all for many years, and now I'm seeing college age students and younger students, just younger people in general coming out, which is a little bit of a positive sign, I believe. But yes, so that's just the only thing I wanted to add.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. Gareth, you're gonna get our last time is do what you need to do, and then we're gonna let our sisters, Sister Roxanne and Sister Hanadi, have the last word. Inshallah, go for it.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm always the relief guy, the guy that everybody loves to hate,
the
right?
cleanup guy,
right? Yeah. So I had for better or for worse, I had a very clear opportunity to personally witness the trauma and the pain that Hanadi, as a Muslim Palestinian, felt, because when I was part of the cohort that, whoa, turn the light back on. Yeah. So the cohort, the interfaith cohort that I was a part of with my different interfaith colleagues, the issue of Palestine came up literally around this time last year, came up, and there were discussions that were had, and there was a lot of gaslighting in the room. And I saw the pain that Hannity felt, and the pain gripped her in a very succinct way. And I could tell that she was highly triggered and she was highly pained, so much so that I know that she, like, in her position as like her job, she didn't want to say things that would get her fired on the spot. But I knew what she wanted to say. Like, I knew what she wanted to express and verbalize. And fortunately for me, I was able to say what she couldn't say, because I know for a fact if she would have said the same things that I said professionally, it would have been a big problem for her. But that by default is a problem. The fact that you have oppressed people who are connected to oppressed people who are the children and the descendants of oppressed people, they are marginalized to such an inhumane, disgusting extent that if they do speak out, they get penalized, but those who are connected to the oppressor don't get penalized. The oppressors themselves don't get penalized. On Instagram, there was a video of this guy. He literally had the audacity to say, this man's name is Brian Kaplan. He said, the only way to really resolve the hostage crisis is that 50 Palestinian women have to be abducted and raped. He literally said this word for word. And he said this publicly. This is filmed. He said this shamelessly. He said this publicly. And when it comes to the psychology of oppression, right, there's always three themes that are constantly and consistently used when one people wants to break down another people: theft, rape, and murder. And we know this from the Quran, where Allah speaks about the tactics of Fir'aun and when they oppressed the children of Israel, right? Which is really ironic, because the same people who claim descendant from the children of Israel are doing the same things that Fir'aun did to the children of Israel, which is slaughter their males, slaughter their young, sexually captive their women, theft, rape, and murder. Like these same three things, theft, rape, and murder, are the three most paramount things that any people imposes upon another people when they want to completely degrade them spiritually and psycho-emotionally. And when you have a military occupying force, these three things are always done. Like, it's a known fact, it's well documented that theft, rape, and murder has been occurring anywhere U.S. occupation forces have gone to, or any occupying force that the U.S. has directly supported. It's a known documented fact that theft, rape, and murder has occurred anywhere Israeli military has been allowed to occupy and thrive. This is not an opinion, this is fact. So with that being said, that is the most diabolical dimension of the psychology of occupation, is knowing that you can be stolen from, that you can be raped, that you can be murdered at the drop of a dime, and you are disallowed to resist and fight back. And if you do, you're slaughtered, you're penalized, all of these things, right? And people want to get into the, okay, well, Hamas killed such and such amount of people, right? Okay. Number one, when it comes to the sanctity of human life, none of us, whether we're Muslim or non-Muslim, none of us have the justification or the entitlement to play the numbers game. A sacred life is a sacred life. It doesn't matter whether it's one life or a billion lives. Every human life has been sanctified by Allah. And we know this because Allah says in the Quran, and do not kill anyone whom Allah has sanctified without justification. So us trying to play the numbers game, who killed who, how many killed who, how many, that's irrelevant. The sanctity of life is the sanctity of life. That's number one. Number two, when a person is being oppressed, the oppressor has zero entitlement, zero justification to judge how the oppressed retaliates. And I'm not saying that something is right or something is wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying being objective, because it's impossible to be just if you're not objective. And this is why Allah is al-Muqsit, the ultimately just, the source of justice, because Allah is always objective at all times. There's never a point in Allah's existence where Allah is biased or where Allah is subjective. Allah is always objective. And that's why Allah is always just, because Allah is always objective. Now, trying to stick with the theme of objectivity, if you're occupying a people, if you're oppressing them, if you're imposing theft, rape, and murder upon them, and they strike back, you as an oppressor don't get to dictate how the oppressed get to fight back. You don't get to do that. Now, the right and the wrong of it, Allah will judge that. But you as a tyrant don't get to, you as an oppressor don't get to say, oh, well, you don't get to hit me like that, because you hit them first. You don't get to shoot me like that. No, you shot them first. You don't get to airstrike me like that. No, you airstruck first. So if you lash out, you don't get to judge how another person lashes out against you. It's just like the typical bully at school, right? It's just like the bully, if the bully knocks over your lunch and you spit on them. Spitting is disgusting, obviously, but the bully doesn't get to dictate how the bullied reacts because you're the bully. So if you're the bully, you just got to charge it to the game. You just got to, it is what it is at that point. A bully never gets to dictate how the bully defends themselves. And I'm going to just end it there.
MashaAllah. All right. Usually, we like to keep it to an hour, but that's blown past. But alhamdulillah. But it was just, it was well needed. Some of us need this release, if for nothing else than to get this stuff off our chest. So I will ask our sister Roxanne if you can, give us some closing remarks, inshallah.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. It was a release, and it is nice to commune and convene with you all and to feel like this is a safe space, which has been a problem for the discourse of this matter. I think I wanted to just close with, I think we've all seen that amazing clip of the wonderful Egyptian doctor turned comedian turned political activist Bassem Youssef when he talked to Piers Morgan about this amazing analogy. And again, the words always escape me, but with much smarter people and the things that the three of you said, Naziat, Yusma, Gareth, brothers, sisters, the words that you're saying, they're clicking for me. But what Bassem Youssef said that also clicked for me is that the relationship of the Palestinian people to the state of Israel, the Zionist state, the state of oppression, not the vision of that many Jewish people thought that it could be, but the actual reality of what it is like that of a narcissist. And America has become its enabler. And if in terms of the psychology, we need to think about this relationship of how an enabler allows a narcissist or an abuser to continue to do the things that we all know is wrong. And what I use as wrong, we could talk about religious wrong, we could talk about morality, we could talk about ethics, we could talk about our humanity, but it's wrong in terms of international law. That's how we govern in this world. And for those of us that are religious, there's an extension of that that's much deeper, and it happens to be consistent. The international law says that occupied people have a right to resist, just like the Quran says. So there's not a lot of asymmetry here. But what's happening in this narcissistic relationship is this smokescreen of no, that's not what you're doing. You are not occupying settlements to get hostages to reclaim the 2,000 people that have been imprisoned since Trump dictated that now all of Jerusalem should be the capital of Israel, so that all of this persecution that's been happening for 6 and 7 years, and the people that have been detained in East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, Jenin, Jabalia, all of these places, these are all the people that are the consequence of that decision. Those attacks were a response to release those people, those women and children that didn't do anything wrong, that were innocent. It was meant to be a bargaining chip. Of course, things went wrong. And of course, many innocent lives were lost. Of course, that's a travesty. But to tell us that it is not what we're seeing and it is not true, it's like a narcissistic relationship. And all Palestinians have been asking Americans is to put some boundaries with this narcissist. Because we know a narcissist, this concept of Zionism, it's going to be a tough one for the world. It's already taken a hold of our land, of our holy places. It's bombed our mosques. It's bombed schools, United Nations, schools, structures, and people, journalists, with impunity, no accountability. We get it. Okay, we Palestinians, we see it. But all we've asked America to do is stop enabling this narcissist to continue, because when the enablement stops, then maybe we could start on a path to true peace. Justice has to come first. And we can't have justice if America keeps providing the smokescreen for Israel's atrocities that the world sees clearly. And this is the psychology, I think, in a nutshell, from Bassem Youssef.
Yes, subhanAllah. You're right. I watched that interview, and it was spectacular the way he handled it. It was very good. It's very good. All right, Sister Hanadi.
Thank you. Just want to thank you guys for the invitation, for the conversation, for the space, for providing somewhat of relief for my soul to be able to talk about the anxiety, to talk about the mental issues that arise from what's happening and what has happened and what keeps happening. I just think I just want to address that, Gareth, that situation that happened a year ago, it's like 10 times worse now. And I'll say it, and I co-facilitate a leadership development program that Gareth was part of. And I'll tell you, the situation in my standing in certain situations has changed quite a bit in terms of how I talk about Palestine and how we come across when we talk about this issue. And Palestine's not an issue, it's an everlasting moment in who we are and where we are in this world. And I'll say that I've never shied away from talking about Palestine or my outlook, but it's about teetering on that line of being whether politically correct and maintaining my position and or not, right? And now I'm at the point where I don't care, because I'm no longer going to sugarcoat and worry about your feelings and how, not you guys, but people in response to asking to condemn Hamas without condemning Israel. How do you condemn Hamas without condemning Israel? If you're going to walk that line and having now this open conversation, there's no such thing as being neutral, because if you're being neutral, you've already chosen a side, right? And I think that is something to make very, very clearly. And I think there are people that are out there that can't necessarily come out and say these things, and understandably so, because you can't afford to lose your job. You can't afford, this is not, and especially for those of us that live in New York City, you can't live without income. It's so expensive here, right? Like, so to be able to come out and speak about Palestine, it's very important, and unfortunately, it comes with a heavy price, right? And like, I'm thinking about all of us and the spaces that we're in, and the heavy price, and I say this in a manner that cancel culture is real. And I hate to say that, right? It's very, very real. That gentleman, I don't want to even call him a gentleman, I want to call him an animal, that went to the halal cart guy in the 80s and was berating him and waving that stupid button, right? It's normal for him, right? I mean, now he just got arrested and they're pressing hate crime charges against him, which is great. But since when? You know what I mean? Like, imagine if we as Palestinians or even as Muslims went and did that. What would happen? What would happen? And that's the reality, right? Like, I wish that, and I think the more that we talk about this, the more that we take this risk of, and it's a risk for some people, it is, just to talk about Palestine in the way that we do. Know that, like, Allah got us. It's hard. I think, like, for me, I'm at a point where I'm like, whatever Allah wills for me at this point, I'm okay with. Whether that means I'm staying in this position or I'm moving on to something else, right? And I just, and I'm bringing this all just in focus to say that it's not easy. It's not easy as a Muslim. It's not easy as a woman. It's not easy as a Palestinian to kind of come and sit in a space and talk about my feelings and talk about where I am and, the anxiety, and I'm one thing, but even Roxanne, how are your parents doing? It's much worse than you can imagine. My mom sits on her phone and she's crying the whole time. And it's like, what do we do? You feel helpless. It's real. I'm just going to end it there. But I ask that, like, you continue to have these conversations in your circles, even if they're one-on-one. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to blast things on Facebook or Instagram, but it's about having these conversations one-on-one. If you've changed the heart of one person, you're going in the right way.
Alhamdulillah. Thank everyone. And I want to say these are the things that we, like you said, what are the things that we could be doing? Create more forums like this in your circles. Me as a peer counselor, this is what we do every day, all day. We do groups, we do individuals, we talk to people, we allow them to express themselves. And I was one who was very skeptical about these sorts of forums and talking about your feelings and stuff, just being, a man and a black man at that, it's not something that we're taught to do. It's kind of like counter nature to me and some of us, right? But then I see we have these groups, and I want to talk about, really quick, these groups on the weekend that we do. And I have one group that's full of non-Muslims, 99.9% non-Muslims. And some of them are going through addiction and, and last week it got really deep when they was talking about rapes and murders and like all types of stuff that was going on. But at the end, there was a sense of, there was laughter at the end. There was a thing of, I'm not alone at the end. There was a thing of, okay, I can go talk to this person. If I need to call them one-on-one, I'll link with somebody who was in that particular group. And I think for us, we miss that because we say we have a community, but me and the brother spoke about this at Masjid al-Taqwa. I was one who used to go to the masjid and not speak to anybody. I would stay in my corner. For years, I didn't speak to no one in that masjid. Gareth was there. I didn't know him at all. I used to see them, but I never speak to them. And the issue is that we have to remember, like what the sister and the brothers always say, that Allah is in charge of everything. And we have to stand at night and we ask Allah to not only, relieve the Palestinian people, but all oppressed people around the world. We have to ask Allah for that. We have to come back to our deen in a way to practice it the way it's supposed to be. And people think that this is not, like, oh, okay, well, what is, me having to do this or do that in a religion? How does that equate to actually stuff happening? Because think about this. If I'm next to you praying, I feel your pain. I know who you are. I know what you're going through. At least I should. If we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and this is the reason why I got into the peer support game in the first place, is to get involved and actually do exchanges with people. I'm not going to take too much from you, and you're not going to take too much from me, but I'm going to know what you're going through, and you're going to know what I went through. And hopefully we can help each other through this. And if it's nothing else more than moral support, because some of us can't go to our families. We're the rocks in our family. Some of us are those people that people come to. They don't expect you to fold, but they put so much on you. I get it from here, there. Wallahi, I called a guy today to research a job for someone else. It turned into a half-hour session of just him telling me about his wife and his kids, what's going on. And I'm like, subhanAllah, it doesn't turn off. Because when you're that guy or you're that woman that other people always come to, when you're the one out in the streets fighting for other people all the time, when you're the one who has to stand up for your family and those people all the time, who checks on that person? I remember calling the imam from overseas. I just hit him up like, yo, man, just wanted to check on you, see how everything is going. He was like, subhanAllah, that has never happened to him in his whole career. Nobody just called this to see how he was doing. And this is what we have to do as Muslims. We check on each other. Our whole religion is based on peer support, if you didn't know that. When we make salah together. Why? When we go on Hajj, we go on Hajj together. Why? From the beginning, I always tell that story about when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he went to Yathrib before it was Medina, yes? When he got invited there, what did he do? He paired the brothers together. So you can show this is how we live here. The Ansar who were there, they showed look, this is how you till this land. This is different from over there. Our women are a little bit rougher than your women. You have to treat them like this. You know what I mean? The politics here is a little bit different. This dude he's a known dude who's going to be against you. They walked them through that lifestyle. We don't do that with each other. We have to be there for each other as Muslims, even if it's just creating these spaces that we can just talk and deal with each other and get these things out. Because if not, it can turn into something else. This is when the ulcers come. This is when we start snapping at our families. This is when we get irritable and start, because we can't deal with the anxiety and we can't deal with the depression sometimes. And it's all right to be that way. And like the brother said last, it's all right not to be okay. And that's cool. But then what do you do when you're not okay? Do you talk to somebody? Especially me, I'm the worst at that. because I'm always that guy that people call. You know what I mean? So I don't want them to see me as weak or the one who needs help, you know? So we have to be more mindful of each other and take care of each other the way we're supposed to. So if you can create more of these forums, or if we need some more of these forums, then let's just do that. If we can't do anything else but support each other, or we can find ways to help each other. But the way, the first way is always we have to ask Allah to give us victory, man, to give the Muslims victory over our enemies. I mean, that's the first thing we have to do. And then the second thing we have to do is take care of ourselves and our families. If we are taking care of ourselves and our families, then we take it out to the broader society, because the first thing we do is have to save ourselves and then our families from the hellfire, right? And then we start going and branching out to other people. So this is what we do, inshallah. But we have to close it off. Thank y'all all. I want to thank you. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as always, to give everyone here the best in this life and the best in the hereafter. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to break the backs of the oppressors, give Palestine the victory, give all the Palestinians the victory. And for all of those who died, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make their grave spacious, to make their grave full of light, and to give them Jannatul Firdaus, inshallah. Ameen. Also, I would ask, we make dua always for everyone who's expecting children, who has children, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them righteous spouses, to give them spouses that are, strong on His deen, so that we can spread the Islam the way it's supposed to in this country and beyond. And hopefully we don't, we will have people who will actually stand up for those who are oppressed. Inshallah. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank y'all again.
At some point in our lives, we've all gone through some form of depression, isolation, anxiety, and hopelessness. MPS is here to help you navigate through those tough times and show you that there is hope. You are not alone. Our peer support specialists use their own lived experiences to help assist others on their own road to recovery. Our mission here at MPS is to create a culture of healing and wellness for all of humanity, using the guiding principles of Islam and the 8 dimensions of wellness to foster long-term recovery for those who face mental health and substance use challenges. At MPS, we understand recovery is not one size fits all, but rather person-centered. We understand the importance of the work that MPS can provide. If you or someone you know is in need of our services, please contact us at 347-830-7766 or muslimpeerservices.com.